Now at 5:30, an in-depth look at the state of education after an executive order reshaped the landscape of school choice.
The shifting priorities are creating a ripple effect through communities all across the nation, but especially here in Ohio, where our public schools are bracing for potential funding cuts. It's a debate our Morgan Trout has been covering since the new Ohio legislature was seated back in January.
We have to look at whether these dollars are being spent wisely.
Well, now with school funding being looked at from the top down, we wanted to know what defunding the U.S. Department of Education would mean for children in our state. Morgan is following through tonight.
Ohio public schools have been begging the state for funding for air conditioning, pencils, and special needs supports in classrooms. And the U.S. Department of Education helps fund a majority of these facilities. But with the looming threat that this funding is going to be pulled, teachers are paralyzed.
I see kids whose families don't have enough to eat.
Serving some of the least privileged kids in the state, Columbus City Schools receives more federal money than any other district in Ohio.
I already have students who are falling asleep because they're hungry.
Middle school teacher Joe Decker says that with state budget cuts, he's already dealing with an increase in the number of kids in his classroom.
There are no limits on how many special education children could be placed in my classroom, and I might have 24 along with like 10, 15 more mainstream kids. I've had classrooms from 42 to 26, I think.
You have much bigger issues than worrying about school funding.
Yes.
The safety, the care, the hunger.
Yes. It brings me to tears when I'm talking about my students.
Still, school funding is always top of mind for Decker. Columbus Schools receives about $70 million from the federal government per year. Statewide, the Ohio Education Association reports that the U.S. Department of Education funds $1.5 billion through programs like Title I to help low-income and special needs families. But some Ohio Republican leaders are encouraged by the Trump administration's endorsement to disband the federal education department.
We're going to have a better idea of what Ohio education needs are than they are in Washington, D.C.
Senate President Rob McCauley is one of the decision makers who determines how much state money gets sent to Ohio schools.
The Constitution originally envisioned the federal government would have no role in education and that it would be the states that would control their own education.
He says the right amount of money would go into the best hands if state leaders got access to it.
We're much more likely to figure out the education issues in this country by doing it that way than having a top-down approach.
Congress will need to decide how federal funds are given out.
Lawmakers won't do what is right because I've watched what they've already done.
For years, Ohio has been a champion of another Trump priority, universal school choice, also known as the private school voucher system. Just last year, the GOP leadership has sent roughly $1 billion in public dollars to private schools. And this year, the Ohio House Speaker is looking to slash at least $650 million in public education spending.
Demoralizing our public schools is demoralizing our students and just cutting them 1,000 times over and over. It is heartbreaking to watch day after day.
Now, at the Ohio State House, lawmakers are deciding how much state money should be going to schools. With the threat of cuts to both Ohio and federal money, teachers believe the privatization of public education is imminent. I'm Morgan Trout reporting.
Our thanks to Morgan there. Now, changes in higher education here in Ohio brought hundreds of protesters to Ohio State's campus today.
Legislation overhauling higher education in our state hasn't made it to the governor's desk yet, but the students say they believe it's already having an impact. Students, faculty, and staff gathering here on the campus oval to protest the university's decision to close its DEI office and to protest Senate Bill 1. We've told you how Senate Bill 1 would ban diversity initiatives, curb union rights, and impact how controversial topics are taught on campus. The students protesting there today argue DEI is necessary.
I walk over 15 minutes to class. Sometimes I see no one else that looks like me. The biggest thing that our staff have done here is that they've created a home away from home. And the biggest thing that has been lost is parts of our home, parts of what grounds us on this campus have been lost.
The Republican sponsor of the legislation telling us last month SB 1 is necessary to prevent what he considers liberal bias in higher ed.
It's important that the subject discussion be balanced and that there's no indoctrination, there's no intent to force the students to agree with the professor.
The legislation already passed the Ohio Senate and is working its way through the House.
Another change in education we're monitoring tonight. Online applications for income-driven student loan repayment plans have been removed from the Department of Education's website. The agency was blocked from implementing these plans by an appeals court. The income-driven payment plans were put in place by the Biden administration to reduce monthly payments and shorten the time it takes to get student loans forgiven.